I think people who aren't religious conduct more objective research. 100 strikes, is that what we should be doing in this day and age? Should we revert back to accepting concubinage? Alcohol was banned in a single night, but slavery is still around, concubinage is still around. If it weren't for the verses in that regard, which of you would defend slavery or concubinage? None of you would defend it. We would also be against the concept of having 4 spouses. Imagine if your neighbor married 4 women. You would shame him.
For example, did you know about this?
No, I didn't know.
That's what I'm trying to say. Wouldn't it be nice if you returned to Islam back again? What's up, buddy?
I'm working. I just came to Beşiktaş.
So what do you believe in?
I used to be a Muslim. For those who ask, I tell them I'm Muslim. I don't see a problem with being Muslim, but because I have serious questions about the religion, instead of saying I'm Muslim, I say I desire to be a good person.
There's a big difference between saying or not saying I'm Muslim and being stuck in between. So would you call yourself a Muslim? Because Islam is a good thing.
I'm not saying I'm Muslim. I don't want to say I'm Muslim. I'm just trying to be a good person. I think Muslims have belief without conducting research, or rather, their research is biased. I think other people who don't believe in religions, carry out more research and in a more unbiased way.
What happened to you that your thoughts changed and you stopped being a Muslim?
Because I read. I read the Quran multiple times, and I went online and researched the questions that were going through my head. Like, should we really apply the penalty of 100 strikes in this day and age? Or should we revert back to accepting concubinage? In one night, alcohol was banned, and the streets flowed with alcohol. Couldn't concubinage be banned? Quite frankly, this isn't my idea of morality.
You got confused over the verses, and at this point you thought Islam was wrong, and you left Islam, is that right?
I didn't, but you could say that I'm in the process of leaving. You understand what I'm saying, though.
Perhaps the reason you were confused is because you didn't look into the interpretation. Is the presence of a dual meaning, or your lack of understanding, or thinking that some rule is invalid right now? Evidence that Islam or the Quran is wrong? When you're in high school, you think that something makes sense. And when you get to university, you understand that it's not logical and your thoughts change accordingly. Or what do people say when they turn 40? They feel like things in the past weren't logical. So if human understanding of logic can change over time, then the verses that don't make sense to you at that time may start to make sense in the future, because you'd understand the wisdom and the logic behind it. Like you said, what about 100 strikes in this day and age? Maybe when you see that with the application of the verse about the 100 strikes, the crime stopped from happening. You could say, wait a minute, this makes sense, and change your opinion about it. Like I said, our logic is always changing. But what can happen is by wisdom, because the Quran is a universal book.
Well, if we're not doing something logically, if that doesn't show us it's wrong, then we should also accept the Bible.
I'm not saying we shouldn't conduct logical research. I'm saying the opposite. We should conduct research logically and in depth. Instead, if we just consider the raw meaning, because we don't understand it completely, because we can't do a general evaluation, we would be leaving religion for no reason. Every verse, every rule, every decree has thousands of benefits and wisdom. For example, you were talking about slavery. Slavery is not something Islam invented. Slavery existed in all societies, even before Islam. Just like we have jobs now, in those days they had slavery. In fact, women had no value at all. They didn't even give them names, just numbers like 1, 2, 3, 4. They humiliated them. This is before Islam. Slavery was a valid system in all societies. Today's societies continue to function in an obvious system, right? Well, back then the obvious system was slavery. This wasn't something that was brought about by Islam. But what does Islam do? Islam changes the system step by step. Why step by step? What would happen if you suddenly destroyed the way a society is run? The people wouldn't have a system. So what does Islam do? Islam changes the meaning of slavery. For example, what does Islam say? Feed them like you feed yourselves. Give them to drink as you would yourself. Look after their clothing. Over time, people start to say that their slaves are not their slaves, but their sons. People start talking to them. People start taking them into their families. In the US, slavery was abolished all at once. It was abolished too quickly. And do you know what happened? People didn't know what to do. Why? Because this was the system. So what did people do? They started applying to government offices. Please take us back. What will we do? They said. You didn't show us how or where to work or how to live. You didn't set up a new system, they said. So if we think about using the same model, we wouldn't be giving them a better option. If we don't educate these people on how to run their lives, then we would be torturing them. But what does Islam do? Islam preaches a system in which these people can be integrated into society in a desirable way. It sets up a path to a normal life because there's a large system of life and work. This is a method to help people get their lives back. We can find many examples pertaining to this in the verses and the hadiths. For example, if you commit a serious crime, it's always free a slave. When you have a religion that commands you to free slaves when you sin, aren't you abolishing slavery? The only time slavery is acceptable is with acts of war. So we can explain concubinage like this. this. If groups of people have fallen into slavery during a war, they are integrated into families. Concubines are not public property. And it's also not a situation where they're getting married or living the married way of life. You can think of it like the work system. For example, say you have a textile company. You have people working there. It's a work system. You don't have to think of concubinage as a marriage or like living a married life. It could be like a work system or like a marriage. What's the wisdom in this? Like I said, people are integrated into family life and they're introduced to Islam and they're put into family units. Would it be better if women were to become public property? So what does Islam say? These women are to enter family life and live out their lives that way? So the outcome is that everyone is protected, not torturing them, being good to them, and guiding them on the path to faith is a great part of the system. You have to explain Islam to the slaves and concubines in a good way. But here's where the confusion happens. Why do they get married? A concubine becomes someone's family. She becomes a partner. Or another one becomes a partner to another family. So what's happening there? The idea that she is public property is destroyed. Everyone gets a family, and they live out their lives in that family.
If it weren't for those verses, which of you would defend slavery or concubinage? If it weren't for those verses, no one would defend that lifestyle, and we'd probably be against the idea of 4 spouses, and we'd say it was wrong. Look, our idea of morality and religion have already started to clash. At this point, there's nothing more natural than human query.
Buddy, there's nothing wrong with your questioning. Islam demands it. Question, think, research. أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ. Don't they examine the Quran and think, Allah says? أَفَلَا يَعْقِلُونَ. Don't they use their intellect, they say? Islam is a religion that is constantly pushing you to think and to do research. And you say this is against our morality. What we call morality takes its shape from society. Something you may see as a moral act may be interpreted differently in a different society. The Creator sends down a creed. This is what I desire. This is good. This is bad. And that's how moral and immoral acts are defined.
As you said, social behaviors change. Morality is fluid. That's why I don't interpret the verses as being immoral. What I'm saying is that in a world where morality is always changing, putting strict rules into action and limiting people can lead to problems. Imagine if your neighbor married 4 women. You would shame him.
I wouldn't.
You wouldn't?
If you understand the wisdom and teachings of the Quran about having 4 wives, you wouldn't shame them. Why? Because having 4 wives is a very misunderstood subject. Why? Because people think that they are obligated to marry 4 women. But that's not what is said. In Surah Nisa, it is said, marry women of your choice, 2 or 3 or 4, but this is not a religious duty. This is a limit. In the rest of the verse, it says, if you fear that you may not be able to deal justly with them, then only one. And later on it says, try as you might, you can never bring justice amongst women. So automatically you come to the conclusion that the Quran fundamentally accepts marriage to 1 woman. But what can happen is, by wisdom, because the Quran is a universal book, there is a limit of 4, and if the need arises, the Quran is a practical book that preaches a livable lifestyle. In any circumstance, in any time period, for example, there have been world wars. Can it happen again? Yes, it is. The majority of people who die in wars are men. So what happens when men die? The number of men decreases and the proportion of women increases. So what happens then? The 4 wives rule then becomes totally applicable. The Quran fundamentally accepts having 1 wife, but in its universality, it allows up to 4 wives, depending on the conditions and circumstances. Let's settle this together so that people don't distance themselves from Islam and understand that it's actually wise.
These verses confused me so much that they just go round and round in my head.
What did we say about that verse a little while ago? That the Quran accepts fundamentally 1 spouse? Did you know that?
No, I didn't know.
That's what I'm trying to say. Let's explore together. Let's look at the interpretations together. There's a lot we haven't talked about.
I think in the beginning you start off objectively, but as you progress, you notice that you're starting to become biased. For example, I find non-religious sources more acceptable, so I listen to them. But thanks to you, I've noticed that I need to stop doing that, and I need to try and be more unbiased in my research.
So a verse might seem confusing, but after a conversation, it could seem totally logical. So in the future, you might encounter something different, and you might say, oh, that makes sense, and change your mind. So what I'd like to say is, wouldn't it be great if you return to Islam and continue to explore these topics from within Islam?
For example, if you had an argument with someone and you're on opposite sides, maybe you don't reach a decision in a day or 2, but the thought has started to blossom in your mind. I can promise you this, I will be more unbiased in my research.
And I'd like to say this too, I don't want to think of what we've discussed here as an argument. This is just an exchange of information. So you're saying that you'll do more research? That's great. This has been a great conversation.
I think so too.
So you're saying I won't be returned to Islam now, maybe later?
No, after this conversation, I'm going to profess my faith to God Almighty, just in case I run into a stray bullet on my way home.
So you could do it right now.
Yes, I could.
Okay then, let's refresh our memories together. I'm sure you remember it
Of course.
Eşhedü en la ilahe illallah ve eşhedü enne Muhammeden abdühü ve resulü.